Energy sector receives boost as Green Climate Fund approves $150 million for expansion. And on Panorama, focus is on takeaway from World Carbon Emissions Summit and Nigeria's efforts to achieve sustainable climate change. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on Panorama, reaching you from the Benin Network Center. I am Agatha Egwari Ucho. President Muhammadu Buhari says the world had an opportunity to leverage on the gains of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, in the last 75 years of its existence. The president stated this at the 75th anniversary of the organization in Paris, France. Anthony Forsen reports.
Felicitating with UNESCO at 75, Nigeria President Muhammadu Buhari says remains proud of its close association with the organization since it was established. The president noted that 75 years of building together a more advanced, knowledge and prosperous world through education, science, culture, communication and information.
As we mark UNESCO's 75 years anniversary, we must acknowledge that it is a celebration of history, an occasion to remind ourselves of how we have traveled, seeking to achieve the founding objectives of this great intellectual hub of the United Nations.
Maintaining that Nigeria's relationship with UNESCO has been ever expanding and mutually beneficial in forging ahead for a brighter future.
Our world is fast changing, and so are the evolving challenges. There is therefore no better time to converse for solidarity for the enthronement of peace and development. As I express my personal happiness for being part of this historic celebration today, I congratulate UNESCO and its current leadership for keeping the vision of our great organization alive.
Again, President Buhari was quick to caution that achievements of the years gone by should not be overlooked, especially how the journey has shaped the world. In Paris, France, Anthony Forsen, NTA News.
Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari will Saturday leave Paris for Durban, South Africa, at a special invitation by President Cyril Ramaphosa to join other African leaders at the official opening ceremony of the second Intra-African Trade Fair, which takes place on Monday. The event, holding from November 15 to 21, is being convened by the African Export-Import Bank in collaboration with the African Union Commission and the African Continental Free Trade Area After Secretariat. The theme of the fair, Building Bridges for Successful After aims at boosting trade and investment across the African continent. It also promises to create the enabling environment for businesses to thrive across the African continent, bring to fruition the lofty ideas behind the creation of the AFTA by providing the platform to further identify and prefer solutions to challenges militating against intra-African trade and general market information needed to connect buyers and sellers throughout the continent. Global businesses, including non-African international brands, are expected to key into opportunities generated by the fair, thereby attracting for the continent trade and investment deals worth $40 billion. Various Nigerian investors are already in Durban to take advantage of the event. President Muhammadu Buhari will be accompanied by Minister of Foreign Affairs, Geoffrey Onyema, Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Otumba Niyi Adebayo, Director General, National Intelligence Agency, Ambassador Ahmed Rufai Abubakar, and Executive Director, Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Export Promotion Council, Segun Awolowo. President Buhari is expected back in Nigeria on Tuesday, November 16. In the meantime, as the global conversation on transition to cleaner energy continues, The federal government says it would keep its climate change commitments and at the same time focus on how to do that in a way that works best for the needs of the people, the Nigerian people. State House correspondent Jide Onifadi reports.
Osinbajo has been advocating a just transition to global net zero emissions, particularly calling on multilateral agencies and Western countries to stop the planned defunding of fossil fuels and gas projects in developing countries as part of the energy transition plan towards the global net zero target by 2050. Again, it was one of the major points emphasized by the Vice President when he received this delegation from the World Bank, led by its Managing Director of Developing Policy and Partnerships, Mari Pangesto, as well as its Country Director for Nigeria. Vice President Osinbajo noted that Nigeria remains committed in helping to reduce global greenhouse emissions, even as the needs of Nigeria and other developing countries should also be taken into account.
And the Vice President restated the point that in Nigeria, as in other developing countries, there are issues of the climate change, there are challenges of climate change, but there are also challenges of energy access. So as Nigeria, like other developing countries are dealing with the issue of climate change, we are also dealing with the very critical issue of energy access. And she agreed that the international community will actually have to take that kind of dual strategy to deal with the issue.
Also today, the Vice President interacted with officials of the International Monetary Fund on the IMF Article 4 bilateral consultations. During the interaction with IMF, which was virtual, the Vice President restated Nigeria's position on climate change, adding, however, that no developed economy grew its industrial base on renewable energy alone, and so developing economies should not be asked to do that. In the State House, Jide Onifadi.
President of African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, has commended the Green Climate Fund's approval of $150 million to support the Desert to Power initiative, which will support efforts to expand electricity access in Nigeria and 10 other countries in Africa's Sahelian belt. The FDB is impressed that the initiative will provide 10 gigawatts of electricity to reach 250 million people across the Sahel region. The Desert to Power initiative covers 11 countries: Burkina Faso, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Nigeria, Sudan, Djibouti, Senegal, and Chad. It will help the country's efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, targets, and Paris Climate Agreement commitments. The project is a flagship initiative led by the African Development Bank to light up and power the Sahel region by supporting the development of an electricity generation capacity of 10,000 megawatts through photovoltaic solar systems via grid and off-grid projects. The $20 billion Desert to Power initiative, launched by the bank group in 2015, will create the world's largest concentrated solar zone and draw lessons from successful projects already financed by the bank. Now, one of the most significant outcomes of the Climate Change Conference in Paris is the revelation that member countries have been unable to meet the demands of the Paris Climate Change Conference Agreement. Adogbeji Ojegba reports that this has left the world open to climatic variations, some of them quite harmful.
Special interest groups in the climate change campaign, there has been some progress. However, the take-home proves that emitters contribute to global warming, in particular because of the emission rate from the industries of the G20 nations. There is a clear need to come forward with stronger commitments to actualize 2030. Only then can we expect to maintain the 1.5 degrees centigrade in reach over the critical decade. From the calculation of the major buckets of CO2 emissions, the environmentalists believe that if made robust and implemented fully, net zero targets could help remove an extra 0.5 degrees centigrade of global warming, bringing the predicted temperature rise to 2.2 degrees centigrade. The world has to wake up to the imminent dangers associated with this challenge.
So if they can't meet it, what do you now say about the third world, the arid areas? They won't be able to meet the minimum they have also set for themselves. So it's as good as we'll be good in literatures, we'll be good in policies, we'll be good, but in the implementation of all these literature and policies, I won't say zero.
It usually to affect probably the production of in terms of food, because when the weather changes, if you look at what we have now, we are in November. People said by now there should be a little rain, this and that. For a few months ago, remember, we will not have rain. So because of that, it will really affect in the area of food production and probably other programs.
For countries like Nigeria, it is the opinion of many that financial and technological support is needed to adapt to the emerging challenges staring the world globally if the net zero target is to be achieved. During the COP26 summit in Glasgow, President Muhammadu Buhari assured that Nigeria will cut its carbon emissions and reach net zero by 2060, underlining the key role of gas in the country's energy transition roadmap. In Benin, Adobeji Ojegba, NTA News.
And here in the studio to speak more on takeaways from the Global Climate Change Conference and Nigeria's efforts at combating climate change is an environmental and human rights lawyer and advocate, Chima Williams. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on Panorama.
Great to be here.
All right, so as an environmentalist, you obviously followed the outcomes of the summit that just ended in Glasgow, Scotland. Could you shed more light on the major contentions and decisions reached in the conference?
Well, I think for us as environmentalists, one of the most contentious issues is the question of net zero, which we have described as deceitful because it is a corporate organized idea or program to talk about figures and logarithms that are not easily understood by the people on the ground. And this still is business for the business people, not looking at the impact of climate change on people on the ground. Okay? In these discussions at Glasgow, where were the voices of the local people, the indigenous people, the men and women that are on ground, that are direct beneficiaries of the negative impacts of climate change? Where were their voices? We had about over a 500 strong delegation from corporate entities being at Glasgow, trying to negotiate, but where were the real people? So, the question of trying to hoodwink the world to talk about net zero rather than talking about real zero, because there are two different concepts. Okay. Real zero means that we'll be looking at issues of, remediation, adaptation, and, driving down to how do you put the infrastructures and facilities on ground to ensure that we cut off emissions. You cannot say you want to solve emission, that contributes to greenhouse gases, and then at the same time, you are talking of investment in one place and then continuing, the act in another place.
Okay, what about decisions from the conference?
Yes. Now, when we look at the decisions in terms of funding, support, okay, now the question will be, is this the first time? As we had, at Paris, there were decisions reached to put down on an annual basis $100 billion, to combat climate change remediation efforts. And there was another aspect for adaptation and mitigation. Okay? Now, what has been, or what was the disclosure that we got from Glasgow as what had been released? Even the targets set by the global powers, they were unable to meet. For the remediation, package, they were not even able to meet the 50-50 that was the target.
So what are you saying? Is there
adaptation
progress being made now?
Now you have to look at the background first, so that you will now be able to say whether there is progress or there is no progress. Okay? Because for some of us, the decisions at Glasgow, to an extent, whittles down the Paris Agreement. Okay? Which was, to an extent, a heightened position on tackling climate change. The targets that were set at Paris that were supposed to be enforced. When you now go into mercantile, aspects to cripple down the legal or the quasi-legal position that we hold governments and institutions and authorities responsible and accountable to do certain things, then are you progressing or are you retrogressing?
Okay, now let's get down to the Nigerian level. As a country, we depend largely on fossil fuels. How can Nigeria key into this climate change adaptation?
Yeah. In fact, listening to Mr. President's presentation, to an extent, there is a mixed box, okay? Because Mr. President was very clear on the demands on the developed countries who are the greatest contributors in this aspect, to put down money for developing countries to be able to build resilience infrastructures. Okay? That nobody can deny that it is needed at this point in time. Okay? The necessary funds, but where the fund will come from and how it will be used is an issue for another time. Now, Mr. President have equally mentioned the fact that Nigerians' contribution will be in terms of access. Okay? How do we contribute to make sure that energy is available to the people and in a cleaner manner? And this is where Mr. President talked about, divesting or diversifying from fossil to gas. Okay? Because Nigeria has more gas deposits now. But the question is, it is not about, and this is the general question and the general issue about the net zero contention. It is not about telling us, this is the pathway you want to go. But how is this pathway going to be different from the current pathway, as we have seen that fossil civilization has outlived its usefulness? So we have to look at other forms of civilization, packages that will create a healthier environment, a healthier citizenry, and a healthier nation.
Now, issues of climate change, is it just for government alone? Do the people have their own role to play, even the common man on the streets?
Of course, issue of climate change is everybody's business. Okay?
So what role should everybody be playing?
Yeah. Now, you see, for instance, in Nigeria, there are different tiers of contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. And the greatest contribution comes from corporations, especially corporations that operate in the extractive sector, solid, liquid, mineral, most importantly, petroleum sector, because this is where we have incidents of gas flaring And gas flaring has made Nigeria to be contributing at least 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That makes Nigeria the highest contributor in Africa. So, which means if the operators will put out this obnoxious practice of gas flaring, Nigeria would have been reducing its global greenhouse gas imprints. Okay? And you come down to government. Government needs to put down policies, their laws, including the now upgraded policy of the government when they talked about first the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan.
Okay, what about the common man?
Yeah, the common man's contribution comes in by way of how we consume. Okay, how we consume energy, for instance, and maybe vehicular emissions, bush burning. Okay, these are where common citizens, become guilty in their contribution. Okay. But of course, in all of these, we need regulatory mechanisms and enforceable processes to ensure that everybody plays by the rule.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Chima Williams, an environmentalist. Thank you for coming on Panorama.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right,
thank you, audience.
All right, we'll take a short break now. Panorama returns with more reports. Stay with us.
The vaccine offers hope for a safe country free of coronavirus. I urge all state governments, traditional and religious leaders to take the lead in the mobilization effort within their environment and spheres of influence. I similarly urge all eligible Nigerians to present themselves and be vaccinated in accordance with the order of priority already mapped out at the various authorized designated centers only.
Thank you for staying on. Edo State now has a 30-year development plan that would provide future governments with necessary guidelines to drive development until the year 2050. Governor Godwin Obaseki launched the plan at the 5th edition of the ongoing Alao-Dao Economic Summit to mark his 5th year in office and 30 years of the state's creation. The governor says the dream of making Edo a center for economic transformation has become a reality. Elizabeth Omoko reports.
The Alao-Dao Summit has become a yearly milestone. Not only does it mark the anniversary, but it also provides an opportunity to reflect and assess policy options in order to identify sustainable directions and programs.
The choices that we make over the next 3 years and the pace at which we implement those choices will determine whether we stay constrained by the economic position of our sovereign.
Important learning here, which Edo State could benefit from, is perseverance, resilience, and relentless pursuit of the vision.
Giving account of his achievements in the last 5 years, Governor Obaseki says he has laid the foundation for the new Edo, hence is launching the 30-year defined template that will enunciate the development paths and consequently address poverty, infrastructure, and other socio-economic challenges in the states.
The next 5 years should be one that ushers in a whole era of new opportunities, an era where we'll be able to raise substantial amounts of money from the international capital markets to build a river port which will give us access to the rest of the world, to support something unique that no one else has in Africa, which is a cultural district based on a history, a culture that the world cherishes.
I will give all the legislative backing to this 30-year development plan.
The 30-year development plan of 5 years with 6 periods span 8 electoral cycles. In Benin, Elizabeth Omako, NTA News.
Time now for sports update with Samuel Johnson.
The Super Eagles of Nigeria will be hoping to book a place in the 2022 World Cup when it takes on the Lone Stars of Liberia in Grand Stade de Tanga in Morocco Saturday. Despite winning their last match, Nigeria's representative at the ongoing CAF Women Champions League, Rivers Angels, on Friday crashed out of the tournament. The Nigerian side had lost first 2 matches and was depending on Mamelodi Sundowns Ladies of South Africa to beat Asfar of Morocco in the final group game. About 1,000 women from various parts of the country took part in the 2021 Lagos Women Run, which is the 6th edition. The 10-kilometer run, which was done virtually and physically, took off from the National Stadium gate all through Eko Bridge and terminated at the Mobolaji Johnson Arena, Onikan. Abie Joy of Ondo State finished in the first position in a time of 33 minutes 41 seconds.
I really trained for it and I bless God that I won it. With what we're having with a long distance race now in Nigeria, you find out that Nigeria is going to bring out champions.
Ahead of the 26th edition of the Nuga Games to be hosted by the University of Lagos, Chairman of the Media and Publicity Committee says NTA will play a critical role in bringing the sporting event to the screens of millions of Nigerians. Professor Ayodele Asenwa maintained that to make the games memorable, it is necessary they take advantage of the wide reach